Welcome to the Building Bigger Lives podcast with Michael Regan, my wonderful co host, and myself, Kathryn Peterson. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different, and I am going to interview Michael. He's going to be our guest today. And I'm excited about this because I think that even though you guys have heard him talk a lot on the podcast, you may not really know him and know all the amazing things that he does and has done in his life. So I thought it would be kind of fun to get his perspective on a few things. And let's get this one rolling. Thanks for being here, Michael, is almost the guest.
Yeah, that's it's super convenient. It's like when I lived in Scottsdale and we used to do this thing called a staycation. You know, you get the benefit of going on vacation, but you didn't have to take a flight or drive anywhere. You just,
That's
a
right.
few miles up the road and there you are. So this is perfect. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we've recorded enough episodes where maybe in the high 20s. So it's a good time to kind of circle back and make sure people really know you. So this will be fun today. And it's kind of
Who
good to have you in the spotlight, which I like because as a coach, Michael asks a lot of questions. So I get to turn the tables on him.
Fair enough. You've got the driver's seat. I'll try not to stomp on the air brake over there in the passenger
That's
seat.
right. That's right. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Okay, good. I'm getting more excited. Okay, so first, what drives you daily to do what you do? You're an amazing coach and you get to kind of hear a lot in a day on what's going on in people's lives, and that takes some energy and some passion. So, talk to me about where you get that from.
So the old adage of, are things that you experience in life influencing who you become, or are they just natural? So this is the nature versus nurture conversation that we've had in different contexts. And I'm always finding that there's some blend of both. Whenever I'm willing to slow down, listen to someone's story, and really understand what's going on, I find a blend of both. And so I have to look in the mirror and say, that's probably true of me too. I'm sure if you interviewed my mom, she'd say, oh, Michael was always this way as a kid and had these quirky little things. I know my sister and my cousin used to love to torture me as a young guy because I would have everything, kind of like the shelves you see behind me today. Very, things had a certain order to them, and so that must have been in my nature. And so preparation was a big thing, and they would come into my room and they'd decide, oh, what if we took, that picture frame and moved it over to that side and see if he notices, and just to agitate the heck out of me. And as a kid, I think I just thought I was particular, or maybe my family thought I was persnickety. What I learned over time was that that was a gift that had been planted in me, that if I didn't use it wisely, could be persnickety for sure. And so I have to guard against that now as a leader, but also as a husband and as a dad. But if I use it with prudence, it allows me to remain very calm in the midst of a lot of chaos, because I always feel that I'm prepared for the situation, because that's how my mind is wired. And it doesn't mean I can't get thrown off a little bit, or it doesn't mean I don't get caught off guard from time to time. None of us are perfect. But I think when you ask, about my passion for coaching, it's me realizing that so much of what has allowed me to grow my whole life has been preparation. And so I often will say to people, when we're looking at vision or we're looking at the future, I'm not trying to prognosticate, I'm trying to prepare. And so if I can impute that and help coach my clients to that, my hope is it brings them the same sense of calm that I feel, so that they can feel more confident as they walk into an uncertain world every day. I mean, Kathryn, you show up at the office every day. Clients will throw you for a complete curve with not a moment's notice. And if you panic and if you scramble, that will come across in your professional demeanor, and they will have to decide, oh, is Kathryn who we really trust with this? Or if you have a sense of, okay, I knew that was an option that might get played, I was prepared for that, here's what we're going to do, you remain in control. And so the best answer I can give to that one is I think some of it is in my nature. And then I think some of it has been nurtured through a lot of experiences running, my own business, running teams, and now coaching people who are running business units and teams as well, is preparation seems to be the key ingredient.
Yeah, I think, and one thing I always notice in our coaching sessions is that you do have some questions that you're ready to ask and you're prepared every single time. But it's an interesting perspective to hear the motivation behind that, and you're always great at showing that interest and asking the right questions around that. So
Yeah, that's probably a good segue too. Not that we need to beat this question to death, but yeah, just as you said that, that's another key ingredient. As a guy who went to school to study journalism, I learned early on that, at least in classic journalism, I'm not sure what we're doing today in the news. So this is, going back a few years, but if you look back at the way journalists were trained 30 years ago, asking powerful questions was a huge piece of performing at a high level. If you didn't have that ability to ask really important or tough questions, but with a sense of drawing that person in, like if you were too harsh, they would
mhm.
close up and you would put them off. If you were too soft, your audience would get mad, like you're not asking the right questions. You're not. So you really had to get good at this. And I think that spurs me a lot as a coach as well, is to recognize that coaching sessions aren't about me, they're about the client. So as much as they might come onto a call and think, okay, coach, what are you teaching me today? Or, okay, coach, what are we going to talk about? I'm really quick to remind them that, hey, we agreed up front. Coaching is about you, your priorities, your goals, the things that matter to you. So let's design our plans. Let's prepare around the things that you told me matter most. And sometimes great questions are the way to get that back into the focus of the conversation. So you're right. I do think I prepare a lot for my calls by thinking ahead of time. What are the questions I need to ask Kathryn today to make sure that she stays on track with everything she told me was important?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that insight. It's I think all of us could improve our questions, and I think you think through them so accurately and thoroughly. I appreciate that.
Mm.
And we asked this of a guest of ours, but you were a manager in mortgage, and down the road, you made a big switch into coaching. So, talk me through kind of where you were like, you know what, this is what I'm going to mainly focus on going forward.
I, I think that change happened over a series of small events, and I'll try to highlight them really briefly. At some point or another, when I joined my partner, my production partner, Peter Bartolini, and we began building out first a team and then running a branch and then ultimately running the division for a small farming bank out of Iowa for about 5 years, we we had a vision for what we wanted to do, and a lot of times we played that out, whiteboarding it, um, bringing in exercises from other influences, like maybe some other coaching platforms like Strategic Coach, or authors that had really influenced us in a positive way. And we started building out our model. We started building out what we thought was the way to build a team. We thought was the way to engage with our clients, the way to hire and seek out unique abilities. I remember we used the Colby A index back then quite a bit as a tool to do that. So there were all these things we were cobbling together. And at some point, one of the team members who worked with us had a book on the corner of his desk called Becoming a Coaching Leader. And I remember picking up that book off the corner of his desk, and I was intrigued by the title. And I don't think I had any more than opened it to read the foreword when he said to me, "Hey, you should keep that book. That's really who you are, and you would probably enjoy it and use it a lot more than I would." And I was really caught off guard by that. Like, why is he just giving me his book? He said, "Yeah, I'll probably read it, but like, that's who you are. You should learn
Hmm.
about becoming a coaching leader." Well, of course, that intrigued the heck out of me. So I sat down over the weekend, read the whole book. And when I got to the last page, there was a 503 area code. I didn't know where that was at the time. Found out that was Portland, Oregon. And it said, call us if you'd like more information. And so I reached out to Building Champions and found out about a coaching company that, of course, was founded by Daniel Harkavy, the author of Becoming a
Hmm.
Coaching Leader. And I was intrigued enough to now have that on my radar. And it wasn't long after that that I was at a sales mastery event and I saw on the roster of presenters that, oh, this guy, Daniel Harvey. Oh, good. I can't wait to hear what he has to say. I read his book. And he was the classic. I mean, you've heard Daniel speak, Kathryn. He was the
Mhm,
classic on that stage of one of these things is not like the other. He had a presentation style that I would say today is similar to how I feel about Ken Perry when we just saw him
mhm,
at an event in Las Vegas. It's almost like he was so comfortable being himself that he was really just speaking from the heart rather than from a script. It didn't
mhm,
feel canned. It didn't feel like he was selling anything. It just felt like he had a message to deliver and he was going to use that stage to deliver it, even if I was the only guy who needed to hear it. And so I walked over to their booth after that and said, I need to know more. And it was that combination of events that led me to realize these guys are already steps ahead of me. All the stuff Peter and I are cobbling together, we're
mhm,
ham and egging it. Like we're trying our best to build an ideology around how to build a team and how to build a division and how to do things that we had no business doing. And here, Daniel had an ideology already built out and a model with tools and all these things that made sense to me. It was like, somebody said, oh, this is everything you're talking about. We've just systemized it. So you can plug into the system and
mhm,
accelerate faster. So that's the short answer is once I realized that, I signed up and said, I need to be coached by Building Champions. It took a few years before I think I realized that my calling would be in coaching others. I thought becoming a coaching leader would lead me down the track that the book was intended, which was I wanted to be the coach within my organization.
mhm,
But I worked for a little company called Prime Lending back at that time, and a gentleman named Scott Bristol, who was running that company at that time. I remember I went to him and pitched this idea, hey, Scott, I am ready. I want to coach people within our organization, and I know how much we're in alignment with building champions. And he had to remind me, Michael, I love your passion and I love that you want to do that, but that's why we work with building champions. We want to work with an outside organization.
mhm,
So philosophically, he didn't want our coaches to be internal coaches. He felt that that had a different version of relationship in coaching
mhm.
than if we deployed outside coaching. And I think that's when the nickel dropped. And I realized, okay, then I'm going to need to go work for building champions. And that's a story of its own, but that's how I got at least to the place where I realized my career was not going to be in coaching my team. I needed access to be able to coach lots of people who coach teams, and that probably was the most important professional decision I've ever made because my capacity today is so much different than it would have been had I just if had Prime Lending said, sure, be our internal coach. I probably would have enjoyed that, but I wouldn't have had nearly the breadth of relation. I wouldn't know people like you had
Mhm.
I pursued that. It's been a lot more diverse and interesting for me that Building Champions has given me a platform to stay neutral and work with lots of great people.
I I have never heard that story, and I love that it was the book that brought you there and then sales mastery. So I think that that's I'm so glad I asked that question because I just didn't know, and
Well, you
I
know how
love to
I
hear
got to
it.
sales mastery was, a few episodes back, we interviewed our friend Todd Bookspan.
Yeah.
And I think after I had read the book, I was probably in one of our little Friday, we called them little Friday masterminds. We talked about that, I think, on the podcast at some place called the Spoon or the Fork, or I don't know. We couldn't remember the cutlery. We just knew where to meet. And I think I told him, hey, I read this book. This is exciting. He, of course, was already being coached by, but he said, Michael, this is a great organization. You need to come with me. So he was really the
Ah,
one who
wow.
then got me to take that step of come to the desert. There's other people like us. They
Right.
meet out there every year and they learn from other great leaders like Daniel. So in fact, I think if I now I recall that he really wanted me to meet Bill Hart because that was his coach. He said, I'd
Mhm,
love for you to meet my coach. So I went to Sales Mastery because after reading that book and, sharing my feedback with Todd, he
mhm,
was like, all right, next step, let's go to the desert.
mhm. That's awesome. I love that. And you are such an avid reader. And obviously that led you into where you are today in one way or another. So tell me who you're now reading, following, watching, just because you are so tuned in to everything involving coaching.
Wow. So that's a huge blanket to throw over that. And I hope I don't sidestep it with my answer. But here's what's been kind of fun. So during COVID, I got this idea that I've got these bookshelves full of books. I mean, obviously, here's a few of them behind me here. Here's a few more over
Mhm.
here. I've got a whole bookshelf in my other home down in Arizona. And at some point, it occurred to me, I've read a lot of books, but how often am I really going back and revisiting the truth in some of those stories? So I pushed myself back in the COVID season to download an app called Blinkist. I don't know if any of you have checked that out. Blinkist is a book summary app. It's really great if you're interested in getting an audio version. Yeah, I think they have a PDF as well, but an audio version of an overview of a book. And it's a great way to either introduce you to an author that you might not be sure if that's the book you want to read, or to go back and revisit a book you've already read and just get reconnected with some of the highlights. And so I went through, I guess in the music world, what we might call our greatest hits collection. And this was, there's like an artist who's put out a half dozen albums. At some point, they pull all the hit singles together and sell you a new album called The Greatest Hits. And
Yes.
I went back with Blinkist and created that out of my book collection that I already had. So I figured some of these authors, when you read Jim Collins From Good to Great, it's not like the concepts of that get old. Maybe some of the examples of the companies he references are companies that don't have the same stature today that they might have then, but the principles and the truth are still there. When you're reading, the Boundaries for Leaders by Dr. Henry Cloud, when you're reading Essentialism, when you're reading all these books, the truths are still there. So I lined up a bunch of these and did all that. And then after I accomplished some version of revisiting them and trying to help my clients by reframing them, bringing them back, I'd start talking about, hey, what got you here won't get you there. It felt fresh again, even though that book is, I don't know, 15 years old now. Um, I then got to a place where I realized, okay, now what do I want to do that's fresh and new? Because I could keep just downloading. You know how Amazon works, Catherine. If
Yeah.
you've read a certain author,
Yeah.
it's going to say, hey, try this author. You'll love
Yeah.
this one too. And for a while, that was fun, and it would allow me to explore books. What I found since COVID was, hey, the world has shifted to video. I mean, it's just a fact,
Hmm.
good, better, and different. We have
Hmm.
so many thought leaders now that are putting out amazing content on
Hmm.
video. So I started getting really comfortable with YouTube as a outlet for my learning. And so I'll tell you about one. I mean, we could riff on these if you want, but here's one that I ran into recently, a gal named Cody Sanchez. Have you seen her yet or have you heard from her?
No,
Okay,
no.
so Cody is a young woman, entrepreneurial leader who is really working hard on her YouTube channel to really communicate what I would say the fundamentals of entrepreneurism to a younger audience. And
Mm.
so, what intrigues me about her is she's clearly speaking truths that I recognize. So, an older audience will get it, but her presentation style and her commitment to grow is to a younger group. Well, I've got daughters in their mid 20s, and
Mhm.
so I'm looking for voices that I think could be inspirational to them as they grow into their professional careers or into their plans to parent or to, you know, be, members of their neighborhood and community. So Cody became a person that intrigued me because she spoke with such brash and maybe even direct style,
Yeah.
which I find refreshing. It doesn't mean I necessarily want to do the same thing. I want to remain true to who I am,
Mhm.
but I like listening to someone who just shoots straight. And when I say shoot straight, this isn't political, this isn't religious, this is like business. She talks about running a business. So I have found her to be incredibly interesting recently. And so that's a podcast that you can listen to. That's
Mhm.
if you like the clips, of course she's on Instagram. If you want to see some of her content broken down in a different format, LinkedIn is a great place to find her. She does a great job of documenting some of the things that she talks about there. but that'd be an example. I think another that comes to mind, and I'll just give two because I don't want to ramble too long about examples. A guy named Patrick Bet David. Does he ring a bell at all?
No.
Okay, so Patrick he's a podcaster. So if you can picture somebody like a Joe Rogan who's got this huge audience, Patrick is probably aspiring to get in that space. He calls it the PBD podcast. Um, Patrick is a first generation Iranian immigrant who literally tells a story of nothing. Like my family had nothing, and we had to figure out how to, build a business and then survive and, ultimately thrive.
Mhm.
And today he runs an insurance company worth, hundreds of millions of dollars. He's uh, he's been a financial advisor to people like Kobe Bryant. So he's got before he passed, he's got an audience of professional athletes and celebrities who connect with him. And again, I find his style intriguing because nobody handed him anything. I don't always agree with him on everything. He's got a couple of co-hosts that I think are a little um, quirky and maybe a bit of a sideshow, but I've enjoyed his podcast because, again, he's willing to dive into entrepreneurial topics that I find super interesting because I'm always looking for how can I help my clients think through
Mhm.
how to do things a little bit differently so they continue to grow, they continue to have greater impact. And so he's another voice. The book of his that's out right now is Business Planning for the Audacious Few. And
Mhm.
I found the title to even be intriguing and or the subtitle, sorry. And so those are a couple examples, but I think YouTube as the answer. I really have enjoyed finding thought leaders on YouTube. Doesn't mean I won't like Patrick. I'll still buy
Mhm.
the book,
Mhm.
but it's less about filling up 10 more bookshelves full of books. It's more about, okay, are we using what we learned? Are we getting the most out of what we've already learned? Can we repurpose what we thought we already knew in a modern frame? That intrigues me right now quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a very good thing to ask because so many of us say, "Ooh, what's new? What's new? What's new?" And being able to look at the information that we already have and that we already really related to and appreciated when we did read it, and then implementing it, that's a skill that is rarely honed. So I'm glad that you're bringing that up as a coach, and you always have great ideas and new ideas as well, but I think some of them come from old material, and I think
It's
that's great.
100% true, Catherine. And I think some of that is because I think wisdom at its root is not um, caught up in bright, shiny objects. Wisdom is
Mhm.
rooted in truths that were true yesterday, they're true today, and they'll be true again tomorrow. And so the packaging changes. That's fair. I don't
Mhm.
want to imply that we don't see things differently today than we maybe saw them 50 years ago or 100 years ago. But the fundamentals, it's kind of like the old saying, men lie, women lie, the math, it never lies. So I want to study the math. The math
Mhm.
is where I'm interested because while I do want to ask great questions and learn some context for how the men and the women might use that math, the math is just fundamental. So I want to
Mhm.
understand how things add up. And so
Mhm.
I look for thought leaders who focus more on timeless principles. I think that's why
Mhm.
Coach John Wooden was such an influential leader, articulator of leadership philosophy in my life because his
Mhm.
principles um, are timeless. If you go back and read, the Pyramid of Success and John Wooden's ideology, it doesn't matter what era you drop that
Mhm.
information into, it's still true. So I do think you're right. I think I am a little bit of an old soul when it comes to topics of
Mhm.
wisdom. I'm looking for how can I repurpose a timeless message to an audience that maybe hadn't heard it before? And how do I make
Yeah.
it valuable to them in a way that they can use it today?
That reminds me of the book Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, I think it is,
Yes.
where there was a stat I had read at one point of how many books were written with those concepts in mind. And it was in the hundreds because there was so many concepts at the time were new, but So essentially, by reading that one book, you can cover so many books that have been written since because the concepts are there and basic, but there was so much in that one book. So it reminds me of that when you said that.
Yeah, well said. And you're right. That would be an example of a classic. I mean, Lori's dad, who has been passed now for 13 years, but he passed at 94. So, we knew him well into his life, and he would carry around books just like that, or How to Win Friends
Mm,
and Influence People, which I
yep.
think our guest Carrie Pierce referenced in her
Mhm.
interview on our podcast. Those were classics that influenced Poppy Joe, and we would talk with him about how he
Mm,
applied some of the wisdom of those authors. And it was easy to see, okay, his stories are of the Great Depression or of, the 1950s or something, but that's just the context. The principle applies to you in the year 2000, or now
mhm,
today in the year 2025,
mhm.
2024.
Yep, very true. Very true. Okay, so one of the things that we've talked about and I'm always curious about is being coachable. And as a coach, you see people on both sides, the coachable and harder to coach, maybe let's call them, because I know that that's probably what you would say. So, what makes somebody coachable?
Hmm. At some fundamental level, when someone has enough humility
Mm,
mixed in with their confidence, they're probably coachable. And I use those two words intentionally. Um, it takes someone confident enough to believe there's something better in me. I know that there's a better version of me out there,
mhm,
whether it's as a production leader or as a manager or as a teammate or as a spouse, whatever context, there's a better version of me in there. I'm
mhm,
confident in that, but my confidence doesn't slide into arrogance. I have enough humility to keep that tethered to say there's more to learn. There's more I can learn about myself and others in order to grow. That's a coachable person. Immediately, a word picture comes to mind. Our friend Kevin Gramp, who is
yeah,
one of the most driven human beings I've ever known personally. I mean, this is a guy who most people meet and their first impression would be, are you like some sort of professional athlete? Because you look like you could walk onto a field right now and take somebody's head off, or
mhm,
and he does have that competitive drive without a doubt. He also is one of the sweetest dads I've ever met.
mhm,
I mean, loves his wife dearly. So he's got this interesting mix of passion that allows him to be driven, but also allows him to be really, endearing to those he loves. But the real Kevin is the guy, when you peel all that back, that says, I want to get better. I want to learn more. I want to know more. I want to finish stronger than I started. Everything about him is wired that way. That's someone who's coachable. They
mhm,
have to have enough confidence tethered to enough humility. That's a person that's ready to be coached.
hmm. I don't know if I've ever heard it put that way, and I appreciate that definition. So, and it makes complete sense. So, thanks for putting it so concisely so our audience can understand it. And then with that, because you've had so many years of coaching and so many experiences, what have your most rewarding coaching experiences been?
Well, that's a really thoughtful question, Kathryn, because it allows me to think in a lot of directions at once. One of the obvious answers that we should address right away is it is so fun for me to get to co-host this podcast with you, given that we've worked together over the last 8, 9 years in a context that looks more like a typical
Mhm,
coaching relationship, but at some point your vision for an outlet like this and my desire to step in some ways back into
mhm,
an environment that I had been trained in way back when I studied broadcast journalism. It allowed the two of us to say, hey, let's demonstrate that whole curiosity thing we talk about all the time,
mhm,
and let's find out if we can do this. Let's find out if an audience cares enough to follow us, and let's see what the feedback tells us in terms of where we go from here. That's been really fun for me. You've helped me
good.
see uh, a version of combining two things that I love into one
Mhm.
place. So I love coaching and I love broadcasting. And so a podcast gives us an
Mhm.
outlet to blend a little bit of both of those.
Mhm.
So I want to acknowledge that one right off the bat. You're a big
Thank you.
part of that. I think if I look at this through the same, context of, okay, well, where else have I really had a great experience coaching? I won't, share any personal information because
Yeah.
that's not my style, but I can tell you it is, it's awesome to meet someone's spouse for the first time.
Mm.
When you've been working with someone, maybe a year or two, maybe a few years, and at some point you get the privilege of meeting that person's spouse, and they say something to you like, Michael, I still am not really sure what coaching is. I don't know I don't know if this is like therapy. I don't know if this is voodoo. I don't really know what you guys do. What I do know is the person I live with is measurably different
Mhm.
than before they met you. There is a sense of, well, back to our earlier topic, a sense of calm that comes from preparation that they didn't have. They were so scattered and reactive before. You've helped them really find some harmony between their personal and their
Mhm.
professional lives. You've helped them articulate why they're working so hard toward these goals that they have and
Mhm.
how they're designed to be better for all of us, not just to win some award or go on some trip. When I hear from a spouse and they're able to tell me some version of that,
Mhm.
that feels like the bullseye, because it's easy for me to get on a one-on-one coaching session and find connection because I'm a person who looks to like something in everybody. I mean, if you met my friend group, Kathryn, you'd be like, what a motley crew. I mean,
I know some of them.
yeah, how did, and none of them would necessarily know each other if, I'm like the weird conduit between a lot of these relationships. I think that's part of what I bring into coaching is I'm not worried about trying to get everybody to be like me. I'm not the goal. I'm just a guy. I walk on feet of clay. I mean,
Mhm.
if you've met Lori, you've spent time in our home. If Lori was on this podcast, she'd be quick to tell you, "Oh yeah, Coach Michael. Let me tell you, here's what I coach him on." We're all humans being. That's
Yeah.
that's just a fact. So I really have, I guess, the same sense of confidence and humility that I described in your
Mhm.
earlier question. And so I let my wife coach me. And and so when I meet other people's spouses and I get to hear the impact that they've experienced because of the time we've spent, I feel like that's when I know I've done my job, because ultimately, and you know this from one of our life planning exercises, ultimately, I'm either going to be at your funeral someday or you're going to be at mine.
Mhm.
And when one of us is in the room paying respects to the family of the other, we're all going to look at the rows in that room. And I can tell you, here's the picture. There's going to
Mhm.
be a celebration of your life or mine. And in the first couple of rows are going to be family members. And then somewhere in the middle are going to be all those long relationships we've
Mhm.
had from childhood or college or wherever we, lived. In the back of the room, maybe even standing, are going to be a lot of the people we worked with who came to pay their respects,
Mhm.
business partners, clients, people like that. I want to make sure people visualize that so clearly that they remember we are living our lives for the people in those first two rows. And while we respect the people who came in the back two rows, if we spend all of our lives and all of our time serving them first, think about what that looks like on the day in which we're celebrating a life. I want to make sure people remember the first two rows.
Oh, that will give people a lot to think about. And I think that really pulls together the way that you approach your coaching clients and your life. So thank you for sharing it in that way. And I actually, this might be one of my favorite episodes. So
Well,
just
of
so you
course it is. You got to just sit back, fire off a couple
know.
questions at your old coach, and yeah,
Yeah.
Kathryn, look, I appreciate you doing this, and again, I want to be as humble with this as I can. it is a privilege for me to get invited into people's lives and to get to
Mhm.
walk with them. So I want to walk worthy. I want to be sure that they know that while I have some good ideas, I have some experiences, I've read a
Mhm.
lot of interesting things, that doesn't make me an authority on all these topics. It
Mhm.
just puts me in a position where I have a responsibility to
Mhm.
help someone who said, "Can you help me?" And that fires me up every day. I wake up every day thinking, if this is what retirement looks like, I hope I get to do this till they bury me in that box. I actually scratch that. I don't know if I want to be buried in a box. I think we could scatter some ashes at Busch Stadium if I really had my choice. You and Lori figure that part out. I don't know how to get
Right,
the
right.
ashes down on the infield,
Yeah.
but there's a way. Um, yeah, I really want to do this the rest of my life. I don't have any desire. People sometimes say, hey, how does it feel now that you're in coaching full time and not in, the housing industry anymore? And I think, I don't think you understand what I do. I'm deeper in the career path that I've chosen than I've ever been. And
Mhm.
I love it more than I've ever loved it. I'm so excited about the future of housing, maybe because I know that I've still got kids that have to figure this out.
Mhm.
That's motivating to me. But I'm also very motivated to help a lot of folks in our generation figure out how to make the transition to what the next season of their lives look like. And I'm convinced that we've maybe bought into a view of retirement that is really narrow. And I think there's a much bigger picture out there for our future than just, sitting on the beach and drinking beer all day.
Mhm.
I mean, if that's your goal for retirement, go for it.
Mhm.
I'm certainly not here to judge it. My goal is different. I want to continue to have a voice. I want to continue to have influence. I want to continue to engage people. And getting to coach is the biggest blessing for me because I really, all I need to do is be prepared personally every day. And there is never a shortage of things to help people figure out. So I couldn't be loving where I am any more than I do.
Oh, well, it shows. So thank you for pouring into me, pouring into all your clients, and being the person that you are. So I know you're humble about that, but you also got to take it. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
All right. So, with that, I'm going to close out this episode of Building Bigger Lives. Today, I interviewed the wonderful co host, coach, and lots of other things, Michael Regan. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Find us on Instagram, Apple, and YouTube, like Michael was talking about earlier. And we will see you on the next episode.